everyone, and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Kaelyn. I am a first-year PhD student in History and African American Studies at Yale University. I make academic lifestyle content all about my life as a graduate student, as well as informational videos about graduate school admissions, resources for pursuing research, and everything in between. So today I wanted to talk about the 10 things I wish I knew before starting my PhD. This is someone inspired by PhD and productivity, and she did a video on 10 things to know when starting your PhD, and I wanted to make a video about starting my PhD. This is also applicable to graduate school because I did do my master's at Oxford in US history, so I have been in graduate school for over a year now, even though this is my first year of my PhD. And so a lot of these things are going to be applicable across both programs, but there are a lot of things I wish I knew before coming to graduate school that I'm going to tell you all about. And so without further ado, we're just going to go ahead and get right into it. The first thing I wish I knew before starting my PhD is to come in with an open mind, and that everything I'd been taught up until this point would be called to question. As an undergrad, I actually took graduate level courses. I took a PhD class as well as other seminars with graduate students. So I definitely came into graduate school thinking that I had a pretty good grasp on what graduate school was going to be like, and I was so wrong.
I swear, I didn't know that this was going to happen.
So I'm going to explain this in terms of history, but I think you can extrapolate this out to other subjects as well. But high school is essentially for giving you this falsified narrative of what history is or what American history was. Undergrad is for telling you that that narrative is wrong and that we should be kind of critically thinking about the past. You're brought to question certain things like when should be considered the actual founding of the American state, when should be considered the origin of the American Revolution, was it actually 1776 or should we consider it 74, and those types of critical thinking questions. And then graduate school is for questioning the nationalistic, capitalistic narrative of American history, and what does that mean for the American founding? Should we consider that period of the American Revolution the American founding, or did it go all the way back to 1619 or 1609? And a PhD program is for basically reconstructing the entire way that you think. Coming in with an open mind is incredibly important because I definitely came into certain classes thinking that I had a pretty good grasp on what the subject was going to be or what we were going to talk about that day, and then feeling a bit out of place. Which brings me to the second thing I wish I knew before starting my PhD, which is that you are going to feel like you know absolutely nothing about 100% of the time, and that is okay. I'm somebody that tries very hard not to compare myself to others, especially those in my classes, because I think that there's so much that you can gain from learning from your classmates and from just being open-minded and listening. Practice of listening is something that many people do not possess, and that is something that is incredibly important in graduate school. It's not just about your opinions and the way that you're learning, but also being a sponge and being able to absorb the information and knowledge of others. And so coming in and knowing that you are going to feel intimidated and that you're going to feel like you don't know what you're talking about is essentially part of the game. And psychologists actually say that the learning curve goes that you think that you essentially are well prepared and that you know everything, and then as you start to learn more, you feel like you know less, and that the more you learn and the further you go along in your education, the more you realize that everything that you thought you knew to be right is actually incorrect. So though you come in with a certain amount of knowledge and you are coming in with all this training and practice and use of methods and everything, having an open mind and being prepared to fail or being prepared to feel uncomfortable is part of the process. Being able to essentially sit in a room and listen and take in the information of others is a huge skill that you're going to need to possess in graduate school, especially in a PhD program. So be prepared that you may not be the one leading the discussion, or that you may not be the one inserting the most thoughtful pieces of information or opinions, but that does not make you any less valuable. And if anything, you being able to listen and process and critically think about the things that are being said is sometimes more valuable than being the person raising their hand. The third thing I wish that I knew before starting graduate school or my PhD is to set boundaries ahead of time. If you guys have been watching my YouTube channel for a while, then you know that I am not just a doctoral student, I also have my YouTube channel as well as my own business. I'm in a long distance relationship. I have very close friendships. I'm very close with my family. So being able to balance everything is certainly a challenge, but creating certain boundaries within my daily routine and within my weekly routine is essential for my physical and my mental health. What is said oftentimes about graduate school is that those pieces are often neglected. So make sure that you're being careful about taking care of yourself and your mental health and making sure that you're setting boundaries for yourself and for others, and make sure that you are valuing your own time and giving yourself time for rest. Being a PhD student is an intellectual chore, and you're going to have to be using your brain 100% of the time. So make sure that you're giving yourself time to rest and to enjoy other aspects of life, because I'm telling you, if you can manage to find balance with other areas of your life, your PhD is going to be much more successful and you will be much happier in the long run. The fourth thing I wish that I knew before starting my PhD is to consider publishing early. So every field of study is slightly different and their requirements for publication and whether you need to be published before applying for PhD programs. And I could talk about that in another video, but essentially you need to be thinking about how it is that you're going to be getting published if you plan on staying in academia. Though I had been given this advice in the past, I didn't really take it on board until I started my PhD program and I met with my advisor, and he said, okay, so what in your dissertation from Oxford do you plan on getting published? And I honestly hadn't really thought about it. I didn't really think that anything of my dissertation was going to be publishable, but I have learned since being here that some of the most successful PhD students, those that end up in positions after they graduate, are often those that turn term papers into publishable articles, that are really thinking about getting certain pieces published and that are thinking ahead. So having that in mind when you come into a PhD program will definitely kind of mellow the shock factor of coming in and feeling like you have so much weight put on you, not only as a student and as someone who's eventually going to write a dissertation, but for someone that should also be publishing and going to conferences and networking and developing all of these different methodological skills, practicing your language learning and all of these things. So make sure that you come in and that you're prepared to have that mindset. You don't need to have all those publications just yet. Of course, this is depending on your field, but essentially coming in and being ready to consider how it is that you're going to be publishing throughout your PhD is something that I wish I had been a little bit more prepared for. And the fifth thing I wish that I knew is that PhDs are just inherently isolating. And this is obviously exacerbated by the fact that we are currently going through a global pandemic, and being unable to see each other in person definitely takes a social element away. But the other thing that I wish that I had really considered is that my experience at Oxford or at UCLA were kind of artificial. I was living in buildings with a bunch of other people and I had the ability to meet up with them essentially whenever I wanted to. But in graduate programs, people are spread out. We're all adults living our own adult lives. There are people that are a little bit older in PhD programs that may want to live a little further from the university. And so just geographic space and all of these things culminate in the program being rather isolating. Additionally, you don't have that much coursework, so ability to actually meet people in person is limited. Just the time for interactions are few and far between, so you want to make sure that you're coming in with the mindset that it is going to be challenging to make connections and friends, but that you should make that a priority. Even in this online setting, making sure that you are networking and finding connections inside and outside of your department and inside and outside of your university are incredibly important. I have luckily had this community. I've made multiple friends because of YouTube, and I'm so thankful for that. I don't know what I would do without this particular resource. The sixth thing that I wish that I knew before starting my PhD is that studying from home 100% of the time will cause anxiety. You can do everything that you want in order to create boundaries within your working space. I have my desk in the living area in my apartment, and the living area is where I get all of my work done, and I never take it into the bedroom. But even with those boundaries, I do find that working at home 100% of the time does give me anxiety because I don't feel like there's any separation. While this is obviously due partly to the pandemic, it is also something that is a regular trend within your PhD programs. Working from home and having a working space that is not the library or the university is quite common, just given the nature of the program. You aren't on campus that often, whereas when you were an undergrad, you were living on campus, campus, you hung out with your friends at the library and all of those things. So finding various working environments is incredibly important. One thing that I'm going to try to implement next semester is actually going to the library to study, or just changing up my setting. There are some apartment buildings that have co-working spaces. This is obviously not going to be super applicable at the moment, but I'm planning that in the future I will be in an apartment building where there will be co-working spaces, so that way I can have my apartment, I can have local coffee shops, libraries, as well as that co-working space, in order to create some variety in my working environment, because it does help my level of productivity, but it also creates a separation between my work life and my home life. So the 7th thing that I wish that I knew before starting PhD program is to hold tight to my own study habits and not to let the study habits of others distract me. It is very easy to look at what other people are doing and think, I'm not studying enough, or I'm not doing enough, or they're working during the day and they get to have like a full night's sleep and I'm not doing it right. But everyone has their own study habits and the things that work for them. The thing that works for me is studying in the morning, taking a nap in the afternoon, and then studying late into the evening. That is what has worked for me since I was in community college. It got me through UCLA, it got me through Oxford, and so that is just a system that works for me. While I may look at others and I think that I'm not doing enough, that is a system that works for me, and I just need to hold tight to it. And you also need to discover your study habits ahead of time in order to make sure that you are being your most productive self, but that you are also being true to the way that your body functions and the way that your brain works. The 8th thing that I wish that I knew before starting my PhD is that you should be reading outside of class, even during coursework. And this may be slightly controversial, but based on my earlier point about publishing, you do need to be looking at literature that's being published within the field outside of class time. And of course, this is going to be very difficult because you're taking 3 or 4 courses, you have so much reading. It's 500, 700 pages of reading per class per week. Of course, adding to that, it just creates an added burden and more labor for you. But try to find time during breaks or during the weekend when you can kind of dig into some of the newer articles. Look at the main journals that are being published and see if there are any articles within that may be applicable to you, or that interests you, that may be applicable to your research. This is just going to be important as you go through the dissertation stage and being aware of certain literature, especially as you prepare for comps and oral exams, where you're going to have to create a reading list, knowing current literature that has been produced during the time that you started your PhD program just will help you get a leg up. For example, there is a professor at UC Berkeley, Stephanie Jones-Rogers, who published a book a little while ago about white female slaveholders in the American South, and she's now working on a book which is almost directly applicable to my dissertation, which looks at descent law in early America. A subscriber messaged me saying that she was giving a workshop at Columbia, in which case she was actually releasing a chapter of her upcoming manuscript, and so I get to dig into that, and that's really exciting. Make sure that you're keeping an eye on other departments, on journals, current publications from university presses, in order to know what is up and coming in your field. The 9th thing that I wish that I knew before starting my PhD is to budget ahead of time. Most PhD programs in the United States are funded. Some of them are fully funded or partially funded. It just depends on your program. Luckily, my program at Yale is fully funded with the tuition covered. I receive a monthly stipend as well as health insurance. Within that, I've had to consider taxes, the cost of rent, and everything. So making sure that you have a set budget when you start your PhD and that you stick to it is something that is definitely challenging, but planning ahead is definitely important. And also to save up for moving costs. I spent a lot of money having to move to Connecticut from California, so make sure that you are also planning ahead when you are starting your PhD before you go, because there are going to be moving expenses and most times universities will not pay for them. And the last thing that I wish I knew before starting my PhD was that you should make a plan ahead of time, but be prepared for it to change. The academic market and the academic sphere changes and evolves all the time, and having a plan for how you approach your work and how you are planning for your dissertation is incredibly important, but also be open to change, be open to pivoting. Additionally, most of us come into academia thinking we are directly going to go into a tenure track position afterward, but given the current job market that existed before and now after this pandemic, it's a bit dismal, in which case being able to look look at other types of career options, and developing skills inside and outside of the academy are going to be important to our future successes. So making sure that you come in with a plan, but also be willing to pivot when necessary is going to be very important to your mindset and to your path through your PhD. We have now reached the end of the video. I hope that you enjoyed this one and that it gave you some insights into being a PhD student and some things to look out for. Of course, I'm just a first year. It's my first semester in my PhD program. I plan on making more videos like this along my PhD journey. So this is just the first episode, but perhaps in a year I will have a different set of 10 things I wish I knew before starting my PhD. So make sure that you hit that subscribe button and that you stick around, because there are going to be many more videos like this in the future. I hope that you enjoyed this one. If you did, please give it a thumbs up, and I'll see you all in the next video. Bye everyone.